For 30 years, everyone blamed the wrong person. Until the envelope opened. "Stop the tape." Dr. Phil's voice cut through the studio like a scalpel. The cameras froze. Producers looked at each other in confusion. In his hands, a sealed manila envelope that would shatter 3 decades of lies, grief, and accusations. The elderly woman in the guest chair began to sob. The man beside her couldn't breathe. And Dr. Phil, the man who had conducted over 4,000 interviews, stood completely still, knowing that what was inside that envelope would change everything. What happened in the next 60 seconds would become the most powerful moment in Dr. Phil history. 3 hours earlier, the day had started like any other taping. Margaret Hayes, 74, had written to the show 17 times over 2 years. Her letters all said the same thing. "My daughter didn't run away. Someone knows what happened to Sarah. Please help me find the truth before I die." Sarah Hayes had vanished on October 12, 1994. She was 16 years old. One moment she was walking home from school in a small Ohio town. The next, she was gone. No body. No witnesses. No closure. For 30 years, suspicion had fallen on one person, Daniel Foster, Sarah's boyfriend at the time. He was the last person to see her alive. He had scratches on his arms the day after she disappeared. Police questioned him for hours. The town convicted him in whispers and stares, even though no charges were ever filed. But Margaret had never believed it. And she had spent 3 decades trying to prove everyone wrong. Dr. Phil had initially declined the case. Missing person stories were complicated, painful, and rarely had resolution. But something in Margaret's 18th letter changed his mind. She had written, "I'm not asking you to find my daughter. I'm asking you to clear an innocent man's name before I die carrying this weight." That's when Dr. Phil made the call. "Bring them both in. Margaret and Daniel. And I want every piece of evidence we can legally access." Nobody knew that Dr. Phil's team had been working on this case for 3 months before the taping. The studio that morning was unusually tense. Margaret sat in the green room, clutching a photo of Sarah. Daniel Foster, now 47 years old, sat in a separate room. He had agreed to appear, even though he told producers, "I've lived with this accusation for 30 years. I don't know what Dr. Phil thinks he can do that police couldn't." When the cameras started rolling, Dr. Phil opened with his characteristic directness. "Margaret, you've carried this burden for 3 decades. Daniel, you've lived under a cloud of suspicion for the same amount of time. Today, we're going to get answers." The first 30 minutes were standard. Recounting the timeline, showing photos of Sarah, reviewing police reports. Margaret spoke about the day her daughter disappeared. Daniel described the moment his life fell apart. "I loved Sarah," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "When she disappeared, I lost everything. My reputation, my future, my peace of mind. People still cross the street when they see me." Margaret looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in decades. "I know you loved her. I always knew." "Then why didn't anyone believe me?" Daniel's question hung in the air. Dr. Phil leaned forward. "Because grief needs a target. Because small towns need answers, even wrong ones. Because it was easier to blame you than to accept the terrifying truth that someone else was responsible." The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't going where they expected. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Dr. Phil stood up and walked to his desk. He picked up a folder. "Daniel, do you remember being questioned by Detective Robert Morrison the day after Sarah disappeared? I'll never forget it. 12 hours in that room. Did he ever tell you why he focused on you?" "He said I was the obvious suspect. Boyfriend. Last to see her. Scratches on my arms." Dr. Phil opened the folder. "Those scratches. You said they were from your job at the landscaping company. Detective Morrison didn't believe you. Nobody believed me. I do. Dr. Phil's words stopped everything. The studio went completely silent. Margaret looked up. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. Dr. Phil continued. My team spoke with your employer from 1994. He confirmed you were clearing brush that entire week. We have the work orders. We have photos of the property, covered in thorny bushes and brambles. Your story was always true, Daniel. The scratches were never evidence of violence. Daniel buried his face in his hands. 30 years of accusation crumbling in one sentence. But that's not why I stopped believing you were responsible, Dr. Phil said. He looked directly at the camera. Stop the tape. The director's voice came through. Dr. Phil, we're in the middle of... I said stop the tape. The cameras powered down. The audience murmured. This had never happened before. Dr. Phil walked off stage. Margaret and Daniel looked at each other, confused and frightened. Producers rushed to his side. Phil, what's happening? Dr. Phil turned to his lead producer. Bring me the envelope. The one from the lab. And call Sarah's aunt. Tell her it's time. 5 minutes later, cameras were rolling again. But the energy in the studio had completely changed. Dr. Phil stood center stage, holding a sealed manila envelope. Margaret, Daniel, 3 months ago, my team reopened this case with the help of a private investigation firm and a forensic laboratory. We obtained DNA samples from evidence that was never tested in 1994. Margaret's hand went to her mouth. Daniel sat frozen. In this envelope are the results of those tests. The studio was so quiet you could hear hearts beating. Before I open this, I need to tell you both something. The truth has been hiding in plain sight for 30 years. And the person responsible has been walking free because everyone was looking in the wrong direction. Dr. Phil looked at Daniel. You were 17 years old when Sarah disappeared. You were a kid who lost the girl he loved and then lost his entire future because of false accusations. That ends today. Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. He turned to the audience. I'm going to read what's in this envelope. But before I do, I want you all to understand something. Daniel Foster is not a suspect. He never should have been. And what I'm about to reveal will prove it beyond any doubt. He opened the envelope. His hands, usually steady, trembled slightly. The DNA found on Sarah's jacket, the jacket she was wearing the day she disappeared, has been matched. He paused. It belongs to Detective Robert Morrison, the man who investigated her case. The studio erupted. Margaret screamed. Daniel collapsed forward, sobbing. The audience gasped collectively. But what happened next is something no one in the room, or watching at home, saw coming. Dr. Phil raised his hand for silence. There's more. He pulled out a second document. Detective Morrison died in 2019. But before he died, he was being investigated for the disappearance of 3 other teenage girls in Ohio between 1989 and 1997. His own department was building a case against him. Margaret stood up, shaking. He took my baby. He questioned Daniel for 12 hours. He wrote the reports. He controlled the narrative. Dr. Phil finished. He made sure everyone looked at Daniel while he walked away clean. Daniel couldn't speak. 30 years of being called a murderer, of living as a ghost in his own town, of losing every opportunity because of an accusation that was always a lie. It all crashed down in that moment. Dr. Phil walked over and knelt beside Daniel's chair. The cameras captured what happened next in complete silence. Daniel, look at me. Dr. Phil's voice was gentle but firm. You were innocent. You were always innocent. And I want you to hear me say this. I believe you. Margaret believes you. And after today, the whole world will know the truth. Daniel finally looked up. Why didn't anyone investigate him? Because he was the investigator. Dr. Phil stood. That's how predators operate. They put themselves in positions of trust and use that trust as a shield. He turned to Margaret. Ma'am, I can't bring Sarah back. But I can give you 2 things. The truth about what happened, and the knowledge that Daniel Foster was never your enemy. He was a victim too. Margaret walked over to Daniel. The studio held its breath. She placed her hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't fight harder for you." Daniel looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. "You were a mother looking for her daughter. You don't owe me an apology." "Yes, I do." Margaret's voice broke. "Because while I was grieving, you were being destroyed. And I let it happen." Dr. Phil stepped back, letting them have their moment. The cameras kept rolling, capturing something raw and real. Two people who had been kept apart by lies, finally standing together in truth. But Dr. Phil wasn't done. He returned to his desk and pulled out one more item. A small box. "Margaret, there's something else. When we obtained the evidence from storage, we found this." He opened the box. Inside was a silver bracelet with an engraved nameplate, Sarah. This was never logged as evidence. It was in Detective Morrison's personal effects when he died. His family found it, and after our investigation began, they turned it over to us. Margaret took the bracelet with shaking hands. She was wearing this the day she disappeared. I gave it to her for her 16th birthday. The studio broke. Audience members openly wept. Producers wiped their eyes. Even the camera operators struggled to stay steady. Dr. Phil let the moment breathe. Then he spoke directly to the camera. "This is why we do these shows. Not for ratings. Not for drama. But because the truth matters. Because innocent people deserve to have their names cleared. Because families deserve closure, even when it comes 30 years too late." He looked at Daniel. "You need therapy. You need support. You need to process 3 decades of trauma. My team has arranged for you to work with specialists who understand wrongful accusation cases. We're going to make sure you get the help you need." Then to Margaret. "And we're going to make sure Sarah's story is told correctly. That her case is officially updated. That Detective Morrison's other victims get justice. This doesn't end when you leave this studio. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten." After the cameras stopped rolling, something extraordinary happened. The audience didn't leave. They stood and applauded. Not the polite applause of a TV studio, but the raw, genuine recognition of witnessing something important. Daniel and Margaret stood together on that stage for 20 minutes, talking about Sarah, about pain, about truth. Dr. Phil stayed with them, not as a host, but as a human being bearing witness to healing. Later, in a rare behind-the-scenes moment, Dr. Phil spoke to his producers. "That's why we do this work. Not to expose people. Not to create drama. But to find truth when truth has been buried. And to give people back their lives when lies have stolen them." The episode aired 3 weeks later. The response was unprecedented. Within 48 hours, 2 more women came forward with information about Detective Morrison. The Ohio Attorney General reopened 4 cold cases. Daniel Foster received over 10,000 messages of support. But perhaps most importantly, 17 other people who had been falsely accused in different cases reached out to Dr. Phil's team, asking for help. Margaret Hayes appeared on the show one more time, 6 months later. She had started a foundation in Sarah's name to help families of missing children and to support people wrongfully accused. Daniel Foster was on the board. "Dr. Phil gave me 2 things," Margaret said in that follow-up episode. "He gave me the truth about what happened to my daughter. And he gave me the chance to make something good come from something horrible." Daniel added, "For 30 years I thought my life was over. Dr. Phil showed me it was just on hold. Now I finally get to start living again." Dr. Phil closed that follow-up episode with words that would define his legacy. "Truth doesn't have an expiration date. Justice doesn't have a statute of limitations. And healing can begin at any moment, as long as we have the courage to face what's real. That's what happened in this case. And that's what can happen in yours." The manila envelope that Dr. Phil had held on stage that day, the one containing the DNA results, was later donated to a museum dedicated to criminal justice reform. But it's not the envelope that matters. It's what was inside, proof that truth, no matter how long it takes, will eventually emerge. And when it does, people like Dr. Phil will be there to make sure it's heard. Years later, the impact of that single episode continued to ripple outward. The bracelet, Sarah's bracelet, became the centerpiece of a traveling exhibit on cold case resolution and wrongful accusations. Margaret donated it with one condition: that Daniel's story be told alongside Sarah's. They were both victims, she told reporters at the exhibit's opening. Sarah lost her life. Daniel lost 30 years of his. Neither deserved what happened to them. Daniel, for his first time in decades, began living openly. He moved to a new city, started a small business, and even began dating. Dr. Phil didn't just clear my name, he said in an interview. He gave me permission to stop being a ghost. The episode won multiple awards, but Dr. Phil never displayed them in his office. Instead, he kept a single framed photo, Margaret and Daniel standing together on stage, holding hands, finally united by truth instead of divided by lies. In his private moments, Dr. Phil reflected on what made that day different. "I've done thousands of shows," he told his wife Robin one evening. "But that day, when I held that envelope, I realized something. Truth isn't just about facts. It's about restoration. Daniel got his name back. Margaret got closure. And Sarah, wherever she is, finally got justice." The manila envelope itself, preserved behind glass in that museum, carries a simple plaque. Sometimes the truth takes 30 years. But it always matters. And every day, visitors stand before it, reading the story of how one man stopped the cameras, opened an envelope, and changed 3 lives forever.